So now that we have an idea of how the typical office network looks like, and again, the purpose here is for us to start visualizing how attackers are moving from system to system here. We have this idea of the cloud network now, right? And so this is becoming more and more common, and it can throw a little bit of a wrench into things where it's set up a little bit differently. And so for attackers, this means that they might have to try to attack a company in a different manner. But in some senses, it might just be an extension of that on premise network. So we'll talk about all of that here. Now, when we're talking about cloud computing basic, let's just get a couple things out of the way. The first idea of cloud computing is software as a service, or SaaS for short. Now, this is some sort of piece of software that is run and managed by a cloud provider. Now, the most common things are going to be something like Microsoft 365. That's going to be email in the cloud. It's going to be cloud storage, OneDrive. It could be your Word documents now. Or you can have the same idea in Google Workspace. Or, if you're looking at it as something like Slack, it's going to be network communication there, or user to user communication. So SaaS is really kind of the standard de facto of things right now. But the most important thing is that it is a software solution. And so, for a security perspective, you're really only on the hook to configure the application. You're not really having to worry about anything else on the back end. And this is especially important because, if I had to manage servers and all the applications with that internally on an on-premise environment, it's a lot of work, right? And so this is one of the benefits of going to a SaaS model. That's why it's a subscription, because they're really dealing with all the back end stuff and you're focused on just configuring more of the user's side of the house. Then we have infrastructure as a service. And so when people think of cloud computing, this is typically what they're going to be thinking about. This is going to really be the building blocks for all things that are happening on that server. Now, this is really good because we can take all of our on-premise infrastructure and we can upload that or configure that in the cloud. And when that's happening, that's really what infrastructure as a service is. We're just taking our systems, we're putting those in the cloud, and your AWS, your Azure, your Google Cloud, they're dealing with everything on the back end. Now, there's a gotcha here because it's not always so straightforward to set these things up. For newer companies, they might go and do something where it's a cloud native environment, right? So you'll see this a lot with new startups. Everything's going to be either SaaS or it's going to be an infrastructure as a service. So you might see it where it looks like, hey, we're going to have an office, right? Maybe they're working at something like a WeWork or a Make Offices, this just kind of shared working space, and all of their servers are potentially going to just be in the cloud. And you can have Active Directory in the cloud through Azure Active Directory as well, and everything else is going to be hosted for their services and their software there. So cloud environment, it looks like there's a connection there, but really all the services are hosted in the cloud, and then all of your systems are going to be either remote or might be working out of an office. But there's also this idea of a hybrid environment. And this is where you can have systems that are connecting to the cloud, and it almost is an extension of the cloud. So I can configure this so that the servers in the cloud have direct access to the servers in an office. Now, this is a risk because if a server gets compromised in either the cloud environment or in the on-premise environment, they automatically have access over to the other side. So you'll see this more so in larger environments where they're going through a migration and they want to have this connectivity. Sometimes it might just be a direct connection between the two environments. But really, you really want to look at something that's going to be a little bit more segmented. Now, let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons here. So, the pros of cloud computing is that it's super easy to scale. There's extra resilience because those cloud providers are spending millions and millions of dollars to ensure that those systems are up and running, at least the back end of it. And so, any problems that are going to happen are usually going to be on the user or that customer that is setting something up incorrectly. The other side of this is that there's a cost efficiency for SMBs in particular because you don't have to manage this as much as you do with an on-premise environment. There's a lot of that resilience built in. So it is really helpful to have this for a small environment because you do have you have fewer administrative hassles. Um, and it just allows for a more collaborative environment, especially if you ever grew up in a time when you were sending word documents via email and you had your draft numbers in there. That all goes away when you're using this cloud type environment. Now, the cons here are one, for larger environments, it might not be cost effective anymore. And that's because sometimes you're paying per user, sometimes you're paying, per resource. And so for super large environments, it might not make sense for them to be running stuff in the cloud, at least not all in on the cloud. The real kicker here, though, is that it's that shared security model. And so when we're talking about the SaaS side, it's not as bad because you have essentially a focus on the user security, the identity security. So, getting things like MFA in place, that's really important. But when you're getting into the infrastructure as a service, that's where it gets a little bit trickier because there's more that you have to configure and set up securely yourself. So there's a learning curve with that. And so most of the issues that we're seeing in cloud environments are because it was misconfigured by the user, not an issue with the cloud provider themselves. So, if you're going to step into it, really make sure that you're investing the security side to ensure that you know what you're looking for, that you have the right people in place, and can get ahead of some of these issues.